Nash, a battle-weary Navy SEAL, travels to an isolated coastal town to escape the nightmares of his last combat mission. He only wants peace and the quiet company of his loyal German shepherd, Zeus. But that peace is shattered in the dead of night when Zeus detects something sinister hidden in the thick ocean fog. Trusting his dog's sharp instincts, Nash is led to an abandoned town dock and a rusted fishing boat that should not be there. Beneath its broken deck lies a massive, stolen cache of highly classified military weapons. Before Nash can retreat and call for backup, they are spotted. A dark figure emerges from the shadows, raises a loaded gun, and takes direct aim at Zeus. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments which country you are watching from, and if you love stories that melt your heart, please subscribe to support our channel. Nash killed the engine of his dusty truck. The heavy vehicle settled onto the gravel driveway of a small rented cabin. The wooden structure sat on a quiet stretch of the Monterey coastline, far away from the busy tourist spots. Nash gripped the steering wheel for a moment. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the sharp, salty ocean air. He stepped out of the truck. He was a tall, heavily muscled man in his early 30s. He wore a simple gray t-shirt that stretched across his broad chest, paired with dark tactical cargo pants. His close-cropped dark hair and sharp, unshaven jawline revealed his military background. He served as an active-duty Navy SEAL. But right now, his dark eyes held a deep, lingering weariness. Zeus sat patiently in the passenger seat. The large German shepherd tilted his head and let out a soft whine. His thick black and tan coat shone in the fading afternoon light. Zeus possessed sharp, intelligent brown eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Nash reached through the open window and rubbed the dog firmly behind the ears. "We are here, buddy," Nash said. "Just you and me for a few days." Nash opened the passenger door. Zeus bounded out, his heavy paws hitting the gravel with a soft crunch. The dog immediately began sniffing the perimeter of the cabin, securing the area out of pure instinct. Nash grabbed his single canvas duffel bag from the truck bed. He did not bring much gear. He only needed quiet. They entered the cabin together. The interior smelled of old pine wood and sea salt. Nash dropped his heavy bag on the floor and walked straight to the window. The vast Pacific Ocean stretched out before him. Large waves crashed against the jagged rocky shore below. The rhythmic sound of the water should bring peace. Instead, it triggered buried memories. Nash closed his eyes tightly. The roar of the ocean transformed into the deafening sound of helicopter rotors beating against the hot air. He saw the blinding dust of the desert. He felt the intense, suffocating heat of the sun. He remembered the absolute chaos of his last mission overseas. A critical operation went terribly wrong in a matter of seconds. He lost good men under his command. He carried the crushing weight of that failure every single day. He came to this isolated coastal town to clear his head. He needed to find his center again before his next deployment. Zeus walked over and nudged Nash's hand with a wet nose. The dog sensed his owner's rising distress. Nash opened his eyes and looked down at his loyal companion. He knelt on one knee and wrapped his arms around the dog's thick neck. "I know, boy," Nash whispered into the fur. "I need to let it go." Evening arrived quickly, turning the sky a deep shade of purple, then pitch black. Nash prepared a simple dinner of steak and white rice in the small kitchen. He gave a large portion to Zeus. They ate in complete silence. Afterward, Nash sat on the worn fabric sofa and tried to read a paperback book. The printed words blurred on the page. His mind kept drifting back to the battlefield, replaying the same fatal mistakes. He closed the book and decided to go to bed early. He checked the locks on the heavy wooden doors and windows out of pure habit. He lay down on the small mattress. Zeus curled up on the woven rug right beside the bed. Hours passed in the dark. Sleep completely evaded Nash. He stared at the wooden planks of the ceiling, listening to the wind howl outside the thin walls. Around 2 a.m, the atmosphere in the room suddenly shifted. Zeus lifted his head from the rug. The dog's pointed ears stood straight up. A low, vibrating growl originated deep within his broad chest. Nash rolled out of bed instantly. His bare feet hit the cold wooden floor. His ingrained military instincts took over, instantly pushing aside his deep exhaustion. He moved silently across the dark room. He grabbed his heavy canvas jacket and a black tactical flashlight from the table. "What do you hear, Zeus?" Nash asked in a hushed, tight tone. Zeus stood up and paced rapidly toward the front door. The dog scratched aggressively at the wood, his growls growing louder and much more urgent. Nash unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. A blast of freezing coastal wind hit his face. A thick fog rolled in from the water, swallowing the surrounding landscape in a blanket of gray. Zeus did not hesitate for a second. The dog bolted out into the darkness. Nash sprinted right after him. He relied on the distinct sound of the dog's claws hitting the wet ground to guide him through the fog. They ran past the sandy dunes and headed straight for the old, abandoned town docks. The wooden pier creaked loudly under Nash's heavy boots. The harbor area appeared completely deserted. Small fishing boats bobbed roughly in the choppy water, secured tightly to wooden posts with thick ropes. The thick fog completely obscured the far end of the docks. Zeus ran with fierce purpose. He stopped abruptly at the very edge of the wooden pier. Nash caught up, his heavy breath visible in the freezing air. He looked at exactly where Zeus focused his intense attention. An old, rusted fishing vessel sat moored in the deep water. Peeling white paint covered its wooden hull. The boat looked like it had not sailed in over 20 years. No lights illuminated its upper deck. The glass windows remained pitch black. Zeus paced frantically along the dangerous edge of the wet wooden planks. The dog sniffed the cold air aggressively. He barked, a loud and commanding sound that echoed sharply across the empty harbor. Nash narrowed his eyes. He scanned the dark vessel from bow to stern. Something felt incredibly wrong. The boat sat way too low in the water, indicating a heavy cargo. The distinct smell of fresh machine oil mixed heavily with the natural scent of the sea. Before Nash could analyze the dangerous situation any further, Zeus took drastic action. The dog leaped off the high pier. He hit the freezing black water with a loud splash and began swimming powerfully toward the dark hull of the boat. "Zeus, no!" Nash shouted loudly. A heavy metal door on the deck of the fishing boat suddenly creaked open. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped out from the deep shadows of the cabin. He wore a thick, dark coat and a black knit beanie pulled down low over his forehead. He moved with swift, calculated military precision. The mysterious man stepped right up to the metal railing and looked down at the dark water. He pulled a silver pistol from his deep coat pocket. The man racked the slide of the weapon with a sharp metallic click. He aimed the barrel directly down at the swimming dog. Nash felt a massive surge of pure adrenaline. His heart pounded fiercely against his ribs. He dropped his heavy flashlight, letting it roll away across the wet planks. He lunged forward, sprinting wildly toward the edge of the pier to save his only friend. The morning sun broke through the thick coastal fog. Light hit the calm water of the Monterey Bay. Nash stood on the sandy beach. He wore a faded blue-hooded sweatshirt and loose jeans. He carried a small digital camera around his neck. He needed to look like a normal tourist enjoying an early morning walk. Zeus walked calmly by his side. The German shepherd did not show the aggressive energy from the previous night. Nash trained him well to blend in. They approached the old town docks. The harbor slowly came to life. Seagulls cried loudly above them. A few local fishermen prepared their small boats for the day. Nash kept his eyes on the rusted fishing vessel at the far end of the pier. The boat sat perfectly still. No one moved on its wooden deck. The mysterious man from last night was nowhere in sight. Nash stopped near a small wooden bait stand. An older man stood behind the counter. He sorted through a net full of small silver fish. The man had a deeply weathered face covered in deep wrinkles. A thick gray beard hid his chin. He wore a heavy yellow waterproof jacket and a worn canvas hat. Nash walked up to the stand. "Good morning," Nash said. He smiled casually. "Morning," the old fisherman replied. He did not look up from his wet net. "I am renting a cabin just down the coast," Nash continued. "I like to take pictures of old boats. That rusty one at the end of the pier caught my eye. Do you know who owns it?" The old fisherman stopped moving his hands. He looked up. His pale blue eyes narrowed as he studied Nash. He glanced at Zeus, then looked back at Nash. "That is the Sea Ghost," the old man said quietly. "Nobody local owns her. She showed up a few months ago. The crew keeps to themselves. They do not fish like the rest of us." "What do they do?" Nash asked. "They leave at odd hours," the fisherman explained. "Mostly in the dead of night. Sometimes they stay out for days. Sometimes they return after just 2 hours. And recently, strange people come around the docks. Men in expensive black suits. Men who do not belong in a fishing town. If you want my advice, tourist, point your camera somewhere else." "I appreciate the advice," Nash said. He bought a small bag of dried fish treats for Zeus and walked away. Nash waited until the docks emptied out around mid-morning. He timed the patrols of the harbor security guard. The guard spent exactly 15 minutes getting coffee at the diner across the street. Nash saw his window of opportunity. "Stay close, Zeus," Nash whispered. They moved quickly and silently across the wooden pier. Nash stepped onto the deck of the Sea Ghost. The boat smelled terrible. The stench of dead fish and rotting wood filled the air. Nash moved with calculated steps. He kept his center of gravity low. He checked the main cabin. It was completely empty. Dust covered the navigation controls. Clearly, nobody steered the boat from up here. Zeus sniffed the wooden floorboards intensely. The dog stopped near a large square hatch near the back of the deck. He scratched at the heavy iron ring handle. Nash knelt down. He gripped the iron ring and pulled hard. The heavy wooden hatch creaked open. A dark, narrow ladder led down into the belly of the boat. Nash turned on his tactical flashlight. He climbed down the ladder. Zeus followed him with practiced ease, placing his paws carefully on the wooden rungs. The lower deck looked like a standard fish storage room. Empty plastic crates stacked against the walls. Ice machines sat broken in the corners. But Zeus did not stop. The dog walked directly to the back wall. He sniffed a specific line in the wooden paneling. Nash examined the wall closely. He noticed small scratch marks on the floor. The wall was actually a sliding door. Nash pushed his weight against the wood. The heavy panel slid open slowly, revealing a hidden compartment. Nash shined his light inside. His breath caught in his throat. The secret hold was huge. It stretched the entire length of the lower hull. Neatly stacked wooden crates filled the space. These were not fishing supplies. Nash recognized the shape and size of the crates instantly. He stepped closer and wiped away a layer of dust from the nearest box. A black stencil mark revealed a specific serial code and the bald eagle emblem of the United States military. "These are highly classified munitions," Nash muttered to himself. He pulled out a small tactical knife and pried open the lid of the top crate. Inside, packed in dark foam, lay advanced thermal imaging rifle scopes, equipment strictly reserved for special operations units. Nash realized the massive scale of the operation. This was not a simple smuggling ring. This involved high-level military theft. He reached into his pocket to grab his phone to take a picture of the serial numbers. Suddenly, a loud metallic slam echoed through the hidden hold. Nash spun around. The wooden sliding panel snapped shut. A heavy metal lock clicked into place from the outside. Nash rushed to the door and pushed against it with all his immense strength. It did not move an inch. He was trapped. A sharp hissing sound filled the tight space. Nash looked up. Small nozzles lined the ceiling of the secret hold. A thick, yellowish gas began pouring into the room. The chemical smell burned Nash's nostrils immediately. "Gas!" Nash yelled. Zeus whined and backed away from the falling mist. Nash knew this gas. It was a military-grade neurotoxin. In high concentrations, it caused paralysis in 2 minutes and death in 5. Nash covered his mouth and nose with his shirt. He grabbed Zeus by the collar and pulled the dog close to the floor where the air remained slightly clearer. He scanned the dark room wildly with his flashlight. The walls were solid steel, reinforced with thick wood. He had no explosives. He could not break down the door. His light hit a small metal grate near the ceiling in the far corner. It was an old ventilation shaft. It looked barely wide enough for a large dog, let alone a grown man with broad shoulders. Nash did not hesitate. He dragged a heavy military crate directly under the vent. He jumped onto the box. He pulled his knife and jammed the thick steel blade under the edge of the metal grate. He twisted his wrist with explosive force. The rusty screws snapped off. The grate clattered to the floor. The yellow gas filled the room rapidly. Nash's eyes watered. His lungs burned. He lifted Zeus with both arms. "Go, Zeus! Go up!" Nash commanded. The dog scrambled into the narrow metal tube. Nash grabbed the edge of the opening and pulled his heavy body up. His broad shoulders scraped painfully against the sharp metal edges. The rusted screws tore at his shirt, scratching his skin. He kicked his heavy boots against the wall to gain traction. He forced himself forward inch by inch. The toxic gas drifted up into the opening right behind him, pushing him to move faster. Nash crawled forward blindly in the pitch-black tunnel. The metal walls pressed tightly against his chest. Dust and old cobwebs filled his eyes. He pushed Zeus ahead of him gently but firmly. He could barely breathe. The air felt heavy and hot in the enclosed space. They crawled in agonizing darkness for long minutes. Finally, Nash saw a faint sliver of daylight ahead. Zeus pushed his head against a loose metal louver. It gave way easily. The dog tumbled out onto the upper deck of the boat. Nash squeezed his shoulders through the tight opening and fell out right behind him. He hit the wooden deck hard and rolled onto his back. Nash gasped for fresh air. He coughed violently, expelling the burning chemical residue from his lungs. He lay on the cold wood, staring up at the gray morning sky. He survived the trap. But the enemy knew he was here. The real mission had just begun. Nash lay flat on the cold wooden deck of the Sea Ghost. His chest heaved rapidly. He sucked in deep breaths of the sharp, salty ocean air. Zeus stood beside him, shaking his thick coat to remove the dust and grime from the tight ventilation shaft. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, burning away the last remnants of the thick coastal fog. Nash knew they could not stay on this boat. The men below would soon realize their toxic gas trap had failed. He rolled onto his stomach and crawled silently toward the edge of the vessel. He peered cautiously over the wooden railing. On the far side of the town docks, a large black box truck idled quietly near a storage shed. The truck displayed no license plates and no corporate logos on its sides. Two men dressed in dark tactical clothing quickly loaded a final heavy wooden crate into the back. They slammed the thick metal doors shut and locked them tightly with a heavy steel padlock. Nash memorized the specific shape and size of the truck. He recognized the heavy-duty suspension system. It was modified specifically to carry immense weight without looking weighed down. The driver climbed up into the cab and shifted the heavy vehicle into gear. The truck rolled slowly away from the wooden docks, heading straight toward the main coastal highway. "Come on, Zeus," Nash whispered. He jumped over the railing and landed softly on the wooden pier. Zeus followed instantly, landing with a quiet thud on his padded paws. They sprinted back to Nash's dusty pickup truck parked near the old bait stand. Nash tossed his digital camera onto the passenger seat. He opened the back door for Zeus. The large dog jumped inside without hesitation. Nash started the engine, shifted into drive, and pulled out onto the paved road. He kept a very safe distance. He let two other civilian cars stay between his pickup and the black box truck. The coastal highway wound tightly along the steep, rocky cliffs overlooking the ocean. Nash gripped the steering wheel firmly. He needed more solid information before making his next move. He reached into his tactical pocket and pulled out his encrypted military satellite phone. He dialed a secure number he knew entirely by heart. The phone rang exactly twice. A deep, gruff voice answered the secure line. "This better be a life-or-death situation, Nash," Marcus said. "I am in the middle of a massive base inventory audit." Marcus served as a chief petty officer in logistics at the Naval Special Warfare Command. He was a stocky, completely bald man with a brilliant analytical mind for supply chains. He and Nash had survived 2 incredibly harsh combat deployments together in the Middle East. Nash trusted him completely with his life. "I need you to run a serial code for me right now, Marcus," Nash said. He kept his eyes fixed intensely on the road ahead. "I found a crate, black stencil marking, bald eagle emblem." Nash recited the specific alphanumeric serial number he had memorized down in the hidden hold of the ship. Silence fell over the encrypted line for a long, heavy moment. Nash heard the rapid clicking of a mechanical computer keyboard in the background. "Where exactly did you find this specific crate, Nash?" Marcus asked. His tone shifted completely. The casual annoyance vanished instantly, replaced by strict, urgent professional concern. "On a rusty fishing boat docked in Monterey," Nash replied steadily. "What is in the box, Marcus?" "You need to walk away from this right now," Marcus warned. "That serial number belongs to a highly classified shipment of advanced thermal optics and experimental guided munitions." The entire military convoy vanished completely off the grid 3 days ago in the Nevada desert. No distress signal was sent, no bodies were recovered, it just disappeared. Federal intelligence agencies are tearing the entire desert apart looking for it. If you found it sitting on a civilian boat in California, you're dealing with a highly organized, lethal syndicate. "They are moving the cargo right now," Nash stated calmly. "I am tailing a black box truck." "Stand down immediately, Nash," Marcus ordered. "You are on mandatory medical leave. You do not have your SEAL team. You do not have tactical backup. I will contact the federal authorities and send them your exact coordinates." "Send them," Nash agreed, "but I am not losing this truck." Nash ended the call abruptly. He tossed the satellite phone onto the passenger seat, next to the camera. Up ahead, the black box truck slowed down significantly. The brake lights flashed bright red. The heavy truck turned sharply off the paved highway. It entered a narrow, unpaved dirt road leading deep into the dense, overgrown coastal forest. Giant redwood trees cast long, dark shadows over the rough path. Nash did not follow the truck directly onto the dirt road. A large, noisy pickup would alert the professional criminals instantly. He drove a quarter-mile past the hidden turnoff and pulled his vehicle completely off the highway, hiding it behind a thick cluster of tall bushes. He grabbed his tactical vest from the back seat and strapped his standard-issue sidearm securely to his right thigh. He opened the heavy door. Zeus leaped out, his black nose already twitching rapidly in the cool, damp forest air. "Find it, boy," Nash commanded softly. "Find the oil." Zeus lowered his large head. He sniffed the damp soil and the wet, decaying leaves. The smart dog quickly picked up the distinct, heavy scent of fresh machine oil mixed with the burning rubber of the truck tires. Zeus began walking purposefully into the dense woods, staying strictly parallel to the dirt road. Nash followed closely behind, stepping incredibly carefully to avoid snapping any dry twigs. The forest grew thicker and much darker as they pushed inland. The roaring sound of the ocean faded away, replaced completely by the rustling of leaves and the distant chirping of birds. Nash moved with total tactical focus. Every dark shadow looked like a potential deadly threat. They walked silently for nearly 2 miles. The terrain became steep and jagged. Suddenly, Zeus stopped dead in his tracks. The dog did not bark. He did not let out a growl. He simply froze, his entire muscular body going completely rigid. Nash took another step forward. Zeus instantly whipped his heavy head around and clamped his strong jaws firmly onto the thick fabric of Nash's pants. The dog pulled backward with surprising, sudden force, halting Nash's forward momentum completely. Nash dropped down to one knee. He trusted his dog implicitly. He looked very closely at the ground directly in front of the toe of his combat boot. Hidden cleverly beneath a thin layer of dead pine needles, a small metallic device caught a tiny sliver of sunlight. Nash brushed the brown needles away gently with 2 fingers. It was a military-grade infrared sensor mine. A thin, invisible laser beam stretched directly across the narrow forest path. If Nash had taken exactly 1 more step, his leg would have broken the active beam. The resulting explosion would have torn him and Zeus apart in a fraction of a second. Nash exhaled a slow, shaky breath. He reached out and stroked Zeus firmly on the head. "Good boy," Nash whispered gratefully. "You just saved my life." Nash examined the deadly device. It was planted by an absolute professional. The syndicate anticipated being followed by someone. They had secured their outer perimeter with extreme lethal force. Nash carefully stepped over the invisible laser line. Zeus followed immediately, perfectly mimicking his master's cautious, deliberate movements. They successfully bypassed the deadly trap and pushed much deeper into the silent, waiting forest. Nash and Zeus left the deactivated infrared mine behind. They pushed deeper into the rugged coastal forest. The tall redwood trees blocked out the midday sun, casting long, cool shadows over the damp soil. Nash moved with absolute silence. He placed each combat boot carefully, avoiding dry branches and loose rocks. Zeus mirrored his every move. The German shepherd stayed low to the ground. His ears pivoted constantly, scanning the woods for the slightest unnatural sound. The incline grew steeper. They climbed a rocky ridge that ran parallel to the hidden coastline. Nash felt the familiar burn in his leg muscles. It reminded him of mountain patrols in foreign territories. But he pushed the memories away. He needed total focus. A single mistake here meant death. They reached the top of the ridge. Nash dropped to his stomach. He crawled the last few feet to the edge and looked down. Zeus crawled right beside him, resting his heavy chin on his front paws. A massive valley opened up below them, hidden completely from the main highway and the ocean. In the center of the clearing stood a huge abandoned industrial warehouse. Rust covered the corrugated metal roof. Wild vines climbed up the cracked concrete walls. The black box truck they followed sat parked in front of a wide loading dock. Nash observed the area with cold calculation. He studied the layout. 4 men stood guard outside the main entrance. 2 more patrolled the perimeter fence. They all wore unmarked tactical gear. They carried customized assault rifles. Nash noted their posture. They did not slouch. They did not smoke or chat. They held their weapons at the low ready, keeping their fingers hovering just outside the trigger guards. Their eyes constantly scanned their designated sectors. "These are not street thugs," Nash whispered to himself. He analyzed their patrol routes. The guards timed their movements perfectly. They overlapped their fields of vision. They used standard military hand signals to communicate. Someone with extensive special operations experience trained this unit. The enemy commander knew exactly how to set up a secure perimeter. This realization made the situation much more dangerous. Nash was essentially going up against a rogue mirror of his own SEAL team. Down at the loading dock, the truck driver unlocked the heavy back doors. Workers began pulling the wooden military crates out of the truck. They loaded them onto metal carts and pushed them inside the dark warehouse. Nash needed to see exactly who received the stolen goods. He needed hard evidence to give to the federal authorities. Nash gestured to Zeus with 2 fingers. They slowly backed away from the ridge edge. Nash found a steep, narrow trail leading down into the valley. They descended silently, using the thick coastal brush for cover. The smell of the ocean mixed with the sharp scent of diesel fuel and cigarette smoke. They reached the valley floor. Nash crouched behind a rusted, overturned tractor. He waited for the 2 perimeter guards to pass by on their patrol route. Once their backs turned, Nash sprinted across the open ground. He pressed his back flat against the cold concrete wall of the warehouse. Zeus glued himself to Nash's side, completely invisible in the deep shadows. Nash moved slowly along the wall toward the back of the building. He found a dirty ground-level window covered in thick iron bars. He carefully wiped away a layer of grime with his thumb and peered inside. The interior of the warehouse was massive. Harsh halogen work lights hung from the steel rafters, illuminating a large central clearing. The wooden crates from the truck sat stacked neatly on wooden pallets. Two men wearing expensive suits stood near a makeshift folding table. They examined the advanced thermal imaging scopes with keen interest. A silver metal briefcase sat open on the table, packed tightly with thick stacks of $100 bills. An international arms deal was happening right in front of him. Nash noticed a small glass-enclosed office elevated above the warehouse floor. Wires ran from the office down to a portable generator. A glowing laptop screen sat on the desk inside. That computer likely held the transaction records, buyer identities, and the shipping manifests. If Nash could get his hands on that hard drive, he could dismantle the entire syndicate. He needed to find an entry point. He continued moving along the back wall, searching for an unlocked door or a rusted vent. The shadows grew longer as the afternoon shifted toward evening. He focused entirely on the elevated office window above him, calculating the best route to climb up without being seen. He made a critical error. He focused too much on the target inside and missed a subtle shift in the environment outside. Zeus let out a sharp, barely audible whine. The dog's muscles tensed like coiled steel. Nash spun around. A seventh guard had broken off from the main patrol route. The man stepped out from behind a stack of rotting wooden pallets just 10 feet away. He wore a black balaclava and held a suppressed submachine gun. The guard's eyes widened in surprise as he spotted Nash standing in the restricted zone. The guard raised the barrel of his weapon. He opened his mouth to shout an alarm. Nash reached for his sidearm, but he knew he was a fraction of a second too late. The enemy had the drop on him. Zeus did not wait for a command. The German shepherd launched himself through the air with explosive power. He crossed the distance in a single, terrifying leap. Zeus hit the guard squarely in the chest. The massive impact knocked the air completely out of the man's lungs. The guard fell backward violently. He hit the concrete ground hard. His submachine gun slipped from his grip. The heavy weapon clattered loudly against a pile of empty metal oil drums. The metallic crash echoed like a bomb blast through the quiet valley. Zeus pinned the man to the ground, sinking his sharp teeth into the thick fabric of the guard's tactical vest. The guard panicked and thrashed wildly, screaming out in pure terror. Nash sprinted forward and delivered a swift, precise strike to the side of the guard's neck. The man went limp instantly. Nash pulled Zeus back, but the damage was already done. The loud crash of the metal drums and the guard's scream destroyed their cover. Inside the warehouse, the transaction stopped immediately. Men shouted aggressive commands. Heavy boots pounded against the concrete floor. The loud metallic slide of assault rifles being cocked echoed rapidly from every direction. The element of stealth vanished completely. The enemy knew exactly where they were. The heavy metal doors of the warehouse began to slide open. Men poured out into the fading light, weapons raised and ready to fire. Nash drew his pistol and clicked off the safety. He looked down at his loyal dog. "Get ready, buddy," Nash said grimly. The fight had officially begun. The heavy metal doors of the warehouse slid open completely. Armed men poured into the fading evening light. Nash did not wait for them to form a proper firing line. He raised his pistol and fired 3 rapid shots. He did not aim at the men. He aimed at the large halogen work lights hanging directly above the wide loading dock. The heavy glass bulbs shattered loudly. A cascade of bright sparks rained down onto the cold concrete floor. Half of the massive warehouse plunged into absolute darkness instantly. "Move, Zeus!" Nash commanded sharply. They sprinted away from their compromised position near the back wall. Angry bullets chipped the concrete exactly where they had stood just a second before. Thick gray dust filled the air. Nash slid smoothly behind a massive stack of heavy wooden crates. He checked his weapon purely out of habit. He had 12 rounds left in his current magazine and 2 spare magazines secured tightly on his tactical belt. The enemy commander shouted aggressive orders in a harsh, booming voice. "Spread out. Find them right now. Do not shoot the merchandise. Check your targets." Nash smiled grimly in the dark. That specific order gave him a distinct tactical advantage. The trained mercenaries could not simply spray bullets wildly into the shadows. They had to pick their targets carefully to avoid destroying the valuable military cargo. Nash and Zeus owned the shadows. This was their element. "We need to reach that elevated office in the center," Nash whispered down to the dog. "Stay low to the ground. Attack only on my mark." Zeus let out a silent breath through his nose. The intelligent dog understood the serious tone perfectly. Nash peeked slowly around the sharp corner of the wooden pallets. 2 guards moved very cautiously down the central aisle. The bright white beams of their tactical flashlights cut through the dusty, stagnant air. Nash scanned the floor and picked up a heavy, empty metal bolt. He tossed it hard to his far left. The heavy steel bolt clattered loudly against a metal support beam. Both guards spun rapidly toward the sudden noise. Their flashlight beams followed the deceptive sound instantly. Nash stepped out from his solid cover on their right side. He moved with silent, lethal speed. He grabbed the nearest guard firmly by the thick tactical vest and pulled him forcefully forward. Nash swept the man's heavy boots out from under him and struck him hard behind the ear with the solid grip of his pistol. The guard collapsed to the floor instantly without making a single sound. The second guard turned back around in a panic, raising his assault rifle. "Zeus!" Nash yelled loudly. The massive German shepherd lunged fiercely from the deep darkness. Zeus hit the second guard directly in the chest with all his muscular weight. The man fell backward violently, dropping his rifle in pure shock. Zeus pinned the guard to the concrete, growling fiercely and baring his sharp teeth. Nash stepped forward quickly and delivered a precise, heavy kick to the side of the man's head. The guard went completely unconscious. "Good boy," Nash said. He bent down and picked up one of the dropped assault rifles. He checked the chamber quickly. It was fully loaded with a full magazine. Now he possessed real formidable firepower. Nash and Zeus pushed much deeper into the dark, echoing warehouse. They navigated the complex maze of stacked cargo crates and heavy industrial machinery. The stale air smelled strongly of fresh gunpowder and old engine oil. The loud sounds of heavy tactical boots echoed ominously from all directions. The enemy hunted them relentlessly through the narrow aisles. Nash spotted the narrow steel staircase leading up to the glass-enclosed office. 4 heavily armed guards formed a tight defensive line at the bottom of the metal stairs. They held their ground firmly, protecting the command center and the valuable computer inside. Nash knew he could not take all 4 of them in a direct, open firefight. He needed a massive distraction. He looked up at the heavy overhead crane track running straight across the warehouse ceiling. A massive metal hook hung directly above the defensive line of guards. The main control panel for the crane machinery sat bolted securely to a thick support pillar just 15 feet away from Nash's position. Nash broke from cover and sprinted aggressively toward the pillar. Enemy bullets sparked brightly against the steel beam right next to his head. He ignored the extreme danger. He hit the main power switch on the crane control panel with his fist and pulled the heavy directional lever down hard. The massive metal hook dropped from the high ceiling with incredible, terrifying speed. It crashed directly into the large wooden crates positioned just in front of the metal stairs. The heavy wooden boxes shattered violently into 1,000 jagged splinters. The massive kinetic impact knocked all 4 guards completely off their feet. Nash did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. He raised his captured rifle and fired short, controlled bursts, providing heavy covering fire. "Go!" he shouted to his dog. He and Zeus charged rapidly up the ringing steel staircase. Nash took the steep steps 2 at a time. He reached the top landing and kicked the flimsy office door open with his heavy boot. The small room was completely empty. The men in the expensive business suits had already escaped during the initial chaos. But the laptop computer still sat on the metal desk. Its bright screen glowed intensely in the dark room. A thick, rugged external hard drive sat plugged securely into the side port. Nash rushed straight to the desk. He grabbed the heavy hard drive and yanked the connecting cable out. He shoved the device deep into his secure tactical pocket. He finally had the hard evidence. He possessed the buyer identities. He secured the shipping routes. He held everything he needed to tear this massive criminal syndicate apart piece by piece. "We got it, buddy," Nash said quickly. He turned around to leave the elevated office. Suddenly, a small, dark, metallic object bounced loudly through the open doorway. It rolled rapidly across the cheap linoleum floor and stopped exactly between Nash and Zeus. Nash recognized the deadly cylindrical shape instantly. It was a modern military-grade stun grenade. A flashbang. "Down!" Nash screamed at the top of his lungs. He dove desperately toward Zeus, trying to cover the dog's head with his own heavy body. He closed his eyes as tightly as possible and opened his mouth wide to equalize the impending pressure wave. The stun grenade detonated. A blinding, impossible flash of pure white light filled the small office, burning fiercely right through Nash's closed eyelids. A deafening, physical boom ripped violently through the air. The sheer concussive force of the explosion physically pushed Nash backward against the metal desk. Nash hit the hard floor heavily. All the air left his burning lungs in a rush. His vision turned completely white. A high-pitched, agonizing ringing noise screamed inside his ears, drowning out absolutely every other sound in the world. He lost all sense of balance and direction instantly. The small room felt like it was spinning violently out of control. He tried to push himself up, but his muscular arms felt like solid lead. He could not feel his fingers gripping the floor. He blinked rapidly, desperately trying to clear his ruined vision. The solid white light very slowly faded into blurry, shifting gray shapes. Through the intense, agonizing ringing in his ears, Nash felt a heavy, rhythmic vibration on the floorboards underneath his chest. Someone was walking heavily up the steel stairs. Heavy tactical boots. A lot of them. He forced his heavy head up. 3 blurry, dark figures stepped purposefully into the office doorway. They raised their long weapons directly at him. Nash reached clumsily for his pistol, but his hand moved in agonizing slow motion. He could not focus his eyes. He could not hear anything. He was completely vulnerable. The enemy had him cornered and helpless in the dark. Nash's ears rang with a high-pitched scream. The bright white afterimage of the flashbang burned his retinas. He lay helplessly on the hard linoleum floor of the elevated office. 3 heavy pairs of tactical boots stepped purposefully into the room. The enemy guards raised their rifles. Nash knew he had less than 2 seconds before they opened fire. He did not need to give a command. Zeus acted entirely on instinct. The massive German shepherd lunged from the dark corner of the office. Zeus did not target the heavily armored chests of the mercenaries. He went straight for their exposed legs. His powerful jaws clamped down hard on the lead guard's calf. The man screamed in sudden agony and collapsed, wildly firing his rifle into the ceiling. The loud gunfire broke Nash's paralysis. Adrenaline flooded his system, overriding the severe concussion. He forced his heavy body off the floor. He drew his pistol and fired 2 precise shots at the remaining overhead lights just outside the office window. Total darkness swallowed the elevated room. "Zeus, heel!" Nash shouted. The dog released his grip instantly. Nash grabbed the thick external hard drive from the desk and shoved it deep into his secure tactical pocket. He grabbed Zeus by the heavy leather collar. They did not take the metal stairs. Nash threw a heavy office chair through the large glass window. The thick glass shattered outward, raining down onto the warehouse floor. Nash jumped through the broken frame. He hit the roof of a parked forklift and rolled off onto the concrete floor. Zeus followed right behind him, landing gracefully on all 4 paws. Total chaos consumed the warehouse. The mercenaries fired blindly into the dark, screaming contradictory orders at each other over the deafening noise. Nash and Zeus used the extreme confusion to slip out through a rusted side ventilation door. They sprinted across the dark, open valley floor. They scrambled up the steep, rocky ridge and plunged back into the dense coastal forest. They did not stop running until they reached the hidden dirt road where Nash parked his truck. Nash unlocked the doors. Zeus jumped into the passenger seat. Nash climbed behind the wheel, started the engine, and pulled out onto the paved coastal highway. He turned off the headlights. He drove purely by the pale moonlight until they put 5 miles between them and the abandoned warehouse. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned completely white. Once they reached a safe stretch of the winding road, Nash turned the headlights back on. He glanced over at the passenger seat. Zeus panted heavily. The dog licked his front left leg repeatedly. Nash pulled the truck over onto a narrow gravel shoulder. He turned on the interior dome light. "Let me see, buddy," Nash said softly. He reached over and gently examined the dog's front leg. A sharp piece of metal debris from the warehouse explosion had sliced a deep gash just above the paw. Thick red blood matted the dark fur. Zeus whined quietly, but kept his leg perfectly still. The dog trusted Nash completely. Nash grabbed his compact medical kit from the glove compartment. He pulled out a bottle of sterile saline solution and a roll of thick white gauze. "This will sting a little," Nash warned. He flushed the deep wound with the clear saline. Zeus flinched slightly, but did not pull away. Nash applied a generous amount of antiseptic ointment and wrapped the thick gauze tightly around the injured leg. He secured the bandage with strong medical tape. Nash leaned back against his seat. He looked into the dog's intelligent brown eyes. He gently stroked the thick fur on Zeus's head. "You saved my life again tonight," Nash whispered. His voice cracked slightly with heavy emotion. "I promise you, I will protect you, no matter what it takes. We are getting out of this together." Zeus licked Nash's rough hand. The simple gesture spoke volumes. Nash shifted the truck back into drive. He had the hard evidence burning a hole in his pocket. He could not wait for the federal authorities to arrive from the distant military base. The syndicate knew someone had breached their secure operation. They would scatter and destroy all the remaining evidence by morning. He needed immediate, heavily armed local backup to secure the warehouse right now. He drove straight into the heart of Monterey. The small coastal town slept peacefully under the dark night sky. Nash pulled into the brightly lit parking lot of the local police station. He parked near the front entrance. "Stay here, Zeus. Rest your leg," Nash ordered. He cracked the windows to let in the cool ocean breeze. Nash walked into the quiet precinct. A young desk sergeant sat behind thick bulletproof glass, typing slowly on a computer keyboard. "I need to speak to your commanding officer immediately," Nash stated firmly. He placed both hands flat on the counter. "It is a matter of extreme national security. I have evidence of a massive military weapons theft occurring just outside your town limits." The young sergeant looked at Nash's torn clothes, bloody hands, and intense eyes. He did not ask any questions. He picked up the desk phone and dialed an internal extension. 5 minutes later, a tall, heavily built man walked out of the back hallway. He wore a crisp, tailored police uniform. A shiny silver star pinned neatly to his chest identified him as Police Chief Thomas. He possessed cold, calculating gray eyes and a neatly trimmed silver mustache. "Come into my office, son," Thomas said in a deep, gravelly voice. Nash followed the chief into a large, well-furnished office at the end of the hall. Thomas closed the heavy oak door securely behind them. He locked the deadbolt with a loud click. He walked slowly behind his large mahogany desk and steepled his fingers. "My sergeant says you have information regarding stolen military property," Thomas said slowly. "Start from the beginning." Nash stood firmly in front of the desk. He detailed everything. He explained the rusty fishing boat, the hidden cargo hold, the black truck, and the heavily armed mercenaries at the abandoned warehouse. He described the massive scale of the illegal arms deal. "They have highly classified thermal optics and guided munitions," Nash concluded. "They are preparing to move the cargo very soon. You need to mobilize your entire tactical unit and call in federal support immediately. I have the absolute proof." Nash reached into his pocket and pulled out the heavy external hard drive. He placed it directly in the center of the mahogany desk. "This contains the buyer identities, shipping manifests, and transaction records," Nash explained. "Everything you need to take them all down." Chief Thomas looked at the hard drive for a long, silent moment. The office felt suddenly small. The air grew thick and heavy. Thomas reached out and picked it up. He turned the metal device over in his large hands. A slow, cold smile spread across his weathered face. "You have done incredible work tonight, soldier," Thomas said quietly. "Truly exceptional." Thomas opened the top drawer of his heavy desk. He did not pull out a police radio. He did not pull out a phone to call the federal authorities. He pulled out a heavy black pistol. Thomas raised the weapon quickly and aimed the barrel directly at the center of Nash's forehead. The distinct metallic click of the hammer being pulled back echoed loudly in the quiet office. "But you brought this to the absolute wrong person," Thomas stated coldly. Nash froze. His combat instinct screamed at him to move, but the gun was locked perfectly on his skull at point-blank range. "You?" Nash asked, his voice tight with sudden realization. "Retirement is very expensive," Thomas replied smoothly. He slipped the hard drive into his uniform pocket. "I controlled the smuggling routes in this coastal town for 10 years. It was a perfect quiet system, until you and your mutt decided to take a midnight walk on my docks. Now, I have to clean up this messy situation." Nash stared directly down the barrel of the loaded gun. The man he came to for help was the very enemy he sought to destroy. Nash felt the cold, hard steel of a pistol barrel press against his temple. Chief Thomas did not hesitate. He barked harsh orders. 2 heavily armed police officers rushed into the office from a side door. Officer Miller entered first. He was a stocky, broad-shouldered man with a completely shaved head and a cruel, permanent smirk etched into his face. Officer Davis followed closely behind. Davis was a tall, very thin man with nervous, darting eyes and a pale complexion. They did not look like public servants. They looked like hardened cartel enforcers wearing stolen police uniforms. "Bind his hands," Thomas ordered coldly. "Take the dog, too. Put them in the holding cell in the lower basement." Miller holstered his weapon and pulled out thick plastic zip ties. Nash knew he could fight. He could probably take Miller and Davis. But Thomas still held the gun pointed directly at his head. A single wrong move meant instant death. He had to wait for a better opening. "Do not resist," Nash whispered to Zeus. The dog growled softly, but stayed perfectly still, obeying his master. Miller grabbed Nash's arms and yanked them aggressively behind his back. He wrapped the thick plastic ties around Nash's wrists and pulled them agonizingly tight, the sharp plastic bit deeply into Nash's skin, cutting off the blood circulation instantly. Davis grabbed Zeus by his heavy leather collar, keeping his distance from the dog's sharp teeth. They marched Nash and Zeus out of the office and down a narrow, dimly lit concrete stairwell. The air grew cold and damp. The basement of the police precinct smelled intensely of mold and old floor wax. They reached a solid steel door at the very end of the corridor. Miller unlocked it with a heavy brass key. He shoved Nash forcefully into the dark room. Nash stumbled and fell hard to his knees on the cold concrete floor. The room served as an old, unused evidence storage locker. A single, flickering fluorescent bulb hung from the low ceiling, casting long, eerie shadows against the damp walls. A heavy, rusted iron cage sat in the far corner. Davis dragged Zeus across the room. He shoved the large German shepherd into the iron cage and slammed the heavy metal door shut. He slid the thick steel bolt into place, locking the dog securely inside. Chief Thomas walked slowly into the room. He adjusted his crisp uniform collar. He looked down at Nash with absolute contempt. "Tie him to the chair," Thomas commanded. Miller dragged a heavy metal folding chair into the center of the room. He hauled Nash up from the floor and slammed him down onto the hard seat. Miller pulled a thick coil of rough nylon rope from a nearby shelf. He wrapped the rough rope tightly around Nash's chest, securing him firmly to the metal backrest. He tied intricate, incredibly tight knots. "You are making a massive mistake," Nash stated calmly. His voice echoed slightly in the small, empty room. "The federal authorities are already looking for that shipment. When they find out you have it, you will spend the rest of your life in a military prison." Thomas laughed. It was a cold, dry, hollow sound. "Nobody is looking at me," Thomas replied confidently. "I am the hero of this town. I have kept the streets perfectly safe for 20 years. The people love me. The mayor trusts me completely. Nobody questions the police chief." Thomas began pacing slowly around the small room. "I have controlled the shipping lanes in Monterey for a decade," Thomas continued, bragging openly. "Drugs, cash, exotic cars. I made sure the right boats docked at the right times without any pesky customs inspections. I provided absolute security for the cartels, and they paid me a fortune in return. It was a flawless, quiet system." He stopped and leaned in close to Nash's face. "This military hardware was my final payday," Thomas whispered. "My golden retirement ticket. I am leaving this country tomorrow morning with $10 million in untraceable offshore accounts, and you are going to help me cover my tracks." "I will never help you," Nash said with intense conviction. "You do not have a choice," Thomas smiled wickedly. "In exactly 1 hour, Miller will drive your dusty pickup truck to the sharpest curve on the coastal highway. He will place you and your dog inside the cab. He will pack the truck bed full of highly volatile explosives." Thomas stepped back, painting the grim picture with his words. "The story will make national headlines," Thomas explained smoothly. "A decorated Navy SEAL returns home from a disastrous deployment. He suffers from severe, untreated combat trauma. He loses his mind entirely. He steals classified military weapons, planning to sell them on the black market. But his paranoia gets the best of him. He attempts to flee, loses control of his vehicle on a dangerous cliffside road, and crashes. The explosives detonate on impact, a tragic, fiery end for a broken war hero." Nash pulled hard against the nylon ropes, but they did not budge an inch. The plastic zip ties cut deeper into his wrists. "It is the perfect cover story," Thomas stated proudly. "The military gets their closure. The federal agents close their investigation, and I disappear completely into the sunset. No loose ends." Thomas turned to his loyal men. "Miller, stay here and watch him," Thomas ordered. "Do not let him make a sound. Davis, come with me. We need to prepare the explosives and move the hard drive to my boat." Thomas and Davis walked out of the cold basement. The heavy steel door slammed shut, locking firmly from the outside. Miller leaned back against the damp concrete wall. He pulled a small silver flask from his tactical vest and took a long drink. He let out a loud, satisfied sigh. He did not look at Nash. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket and began scrolling idly through a social media feed. He clearly believed the heavily bound prisoner posed zero threat. Nash assessed his grim situation quickly. His hands were completely numb. His chest burned from the tight nylon ropes. He had absolutely no leverage to break the chair or snap the bindings. In the dark corner of the room, Zeus sat perfectly still inside the rusted iron cage. The dog watched Miller intensely. His sharp brown eyes tracked the guard's every tiny movement. Zeus understood the deadly situation. He knew his master needed immediate help. The dog stepped quietly toward the front of the cage. He examined the heavy steel bolt holding the door shut. It was old and covered in thick red rust. The locking mechanism sat on the outside, but a small portion of the metal rod extended slightly into the cage enclosure. Zeus opened his mouth. He clamped his incredibly powerful jaws around the small piece of exposed steel. He clamped down with bone-crushing force. He did not growl. He did not whine. He remained absolutely silent. He pulled his heavy head backward. The rusted bolt scraped loudly against the metal housing. Miller stopped scrolling on his phone. He looked up, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. He stared at the cage in the dark corner. Nash instantly dragged his heavy metal chair across the concrete floor, creating a loud, grating screech. "Hey!" Miller shouted aggressively. He stepped away from the wall and walked quickly toward Nash. "Keep completely still, or I will knock you out right now." "My arms are completely numb," Nash said loudly, keeping Miller's attention firmly fixed on him. "The zip ties are cutting off my circulation. Loosen them up." "Shut up," Miller sneered. He stopped right in front of Nash and raised his heavy fist. "You are dead anyway. Deal with the pain." While Miller stood with his back turned entirely to the corner, Zeus pulled hard one final time. The rusted steel bolt slid free with a soft click. The heavy iron door swung open silently on its worn hinges. Zeus crept out of the cage. The massive German shepherd moved like a dark shadow across the concrete floor. He did not make a single sound. He approached the back of Nash's chair. Zeus ignored the thick nylon ropes wrapping Nash's chest. He focused entirely on the thick plastic zip ties binding Nash's wrists. The dog opened his mouth and bit down hard on the tough plastic. His sharp teeth sliced right through the heavy-duty material in a single, powerful bite. Nash felt the immediate release of pressure. Blood rushed painfully back into his numb hands. He flexed his stiff fingers rapidly. He was totally free. Miller raised his fist higher, preparing to strike Nash directly in the face. Nash did not wait. He exploded upward from the chair. He ripped the loose nylon ropes from his chest and launched himself violently at the corrupt guard. Nash did not hesitate. He exploded upward from the metal chair. He ripped the loose nylon ropes from his broad chest and launched himself violently at the corrupt guard. He hit Miller squarely in the midsection. His heavy shoulder drove deep into the guard's stomach. All the air rushed out of Miller's lungs with a loud, desperate grunt. They crashed heavily onto the hard concrete floor of the damp basement. Miller panicked and swung his heavy fist wildly. Nash dodged the clumsy punch with ease, ducking smoothly under the heavy arm. His military combat training took over instantly. Nash pivoted on his left foot and delivered a swift, brutal elbow strike directly to Miller's jaw. The sharp crack echoed loudly in the small room. Miller's eyes rolled back into his head. The guard went completely limp on the cold floor, out cold before he even realized what hit him. Nash did not waste a single second. He quickly checked Miller's tactical vest. He found a loaded spare pistol and a heavy ring of brass keys. He took both and shoved them into his pockets. He turned to his dog. "Good boy, Zeus," Nash said. He breathed heavily, rubbing his sore wrists. "Let us finish this." They stepped out of the dark holding cell and moved rapidly down the dim corridor. The heavy steel door at the top of the stairs stood slightly open. Nash climbed the concrete steps silently. Zeus followed right behind him, keeping his injured leg slightly elevated but ignoring the sharp pain entirely. They reached the main floor of the police station. The building felt entirely empty. Nash checked the front lobby cautiously. The young desk sergeant was nowhere in sight. Then Nash heard heavy footsteps moving quickly toward the back exit. He recognized Davis's nervous, erratic walking pattern immediately. Nash moved like a ghost through the hallway. He cornered Davis near the back door. Davis carried a heavy canvas duffel bag over his thin shoulder. He fumbled frantically with his car keys, his hands shaking in sheer panic. He desperately tried to unlock a black sedan parked just outside the exit. "Where is he?" Nash asked. He raised the stolen pistol and pointed it directly at Davis's chest. Davis froze entirely. His pale face turned a sickly shade of white. He dropped the heavy bag to the floor. The bag hit the linoleum with a loud metallic clink. It was packed full of stolen cash and gold bars. "The docks!" Davis stuttered rapidly. His hands shook violently in the cold air. He took the hard drive. "He has a private speedboat waiting at the end of the main pier. He is leaving the country right now. Please do not shoot me." Nash did not ask any more questions. He stepped forward quickly and struck Davis hard on the back of the neck with the heavy pistol grip. The thin guard collapsed in a silent heap on the floor. Nash pushed the heavy back door open. A massive coastal storm had rolled into Monterey. Freezing rain poured from the pitch-black sky in thick, heavy sheets. Violent winds howled aggressively through the narrow town streets. Thunder rumbled loudly overhead. The severe weather created the absolute perfect cover for an escape. "We have to stop him," Nash shouted over the roaring wind. He and Zeus sprinted away from the police precinct. They ran directly toward the old town harbor. The heavy rain soaked Nash to the bone in seconds, plastering his torn clothes to his skin. The paved streets were slick and highly dangerous, covered in deep puddles that splashed heavily with every rapid step. Nash ignored the freezing cold biting at his face. He ignored his aching, bruised muscles, protesting every single movement. He focused entirely on the desperate mission. If Thomas reached international waters, the criminal syndicate would survive, and the stolen military weapons would vanish forever. They reached the harbor entrance. The massive ocean waves crashed violently against the wooden pylons. Lightning flashed brightly in the sky, illuminating the dark docks for a split second. Nash saw him. Chief Thomas stood at the very end of the longest pier. He tossed a heavy waterproof bag into a sleek, dark blue speedboat. Nash ran down the wooden pier. The wet planks were incredibly slippery. He fought desperately to keep his balance. Zeus ran firmly by his side, his thick paws gripping the rough wood perfectly. Thomas climbed into the open cockpit of the fast boat. He reached confidently for the ignition keys. "Thomas!" Nash yelled loudly. His strong voice cut directly through the raging storm. Thomas spun around. He saw Nash charging down the pier. The corrupt police chief did not show any signs of surrender. He reached inside his heavy waterproof jacket and pulled out his black pistol. Nash raised his weapon, but the unstable, slippery dock ruined his aim completely. He could not get a clean, safe shot. Thomas fired 3 rapid shots. The loud cracks of the gunfire sounded sharp against the roaring thunder. Bullets splintered the wooden planks right next to Nash's boots. Nash dove forcefully to the wet deck, sliding safely behind a heavy wooden cargo crate for temporary cover. Thomas laughed coldly. He turned back to the boat console and twisted the ignition key. The powerful boat engine roared to life instantly. He reached for the heavy rope, tying the boat to the wooden post. Nash knew he could not reach him in time. He was pinned down entirely by the heavy gunfire. But Zeus did not stop. The brave German shepherd ignored the flying bullets and the roaring engine completely. Zeus charged straight down the remaining length of the pier. He moved with incredible, terrifying speed. Thomas saw the massive dog coming. He raised his pistol in a panic and aimed directly at Zeus. Nash screamed in pure terror. He pushed himself up from the wet deck to draw the enemy fire. Thomas pulled the heavy trigger. A loud gunshot rang out. Zeus leapt high into the air at that exact fraction of a second. The fast bullet grazed the dog's right shoulder, tearing violently through his thick fur and flesh. But the intense burning pain did not stop his forward momentum. Zeus crashed heavily into Thomas. The dog's powerful jaws clamped down viciously on Thomas's right wrist. Thomas screamed in sudden, blinding agony. The black pistol slipped freely from his fingers and splashed deeply into the dark, churning ocean. Nash sprinted the final distance. He did not slow down. He launched himself completely off the edge of the pier and landed heavily inside the rocking speedboat. He grabbed Thomas by the thick collar of his jacket and threw him violently against the hard fiberglass hull. Nash delivered a massive, devastating punch straight to Thomas's face. The corrupt police chief slumped backward, completely unconscious. The fight was finally over. Nash quickly turned off the roaring boat engine. He fell heavily to his knees on the wet deck. Zeus let go of Thomas's bleeding arm and limped slowly toward Nash. The brave dog whined softly. Dark blood mixed heavily with the freezing rain washing over his thick coat. Nash wrapped his strong arms securely around the large dog. He pulled Zeus tightly against his broad chest. He did not care about the rain, the freezing cold, or the stolen money. "You did it, buddy," Nash whispered fiercely into the wet fur. "You caught him. You are safe now. I have got you." Nash reached deeply into Thomas's heavy jacket pocket. He pulled out the external hard drive. The critical evidence was completely safe and secured. Suddenly, the loud, piercing wail of heavy sirens cut sharply through the violent storm. Powerful red and blue lights illuminated the dark harbor. Nash looked up. A massive convoy of federal military vehicles and armored tactical trucks flooded the harbor parking lot. Dozens of heavily armed soldiers poured out rapidly, securing the entire perimeter instantly. Marcus stepped out of the lead tactical vehicle. The logistics chief wore full battle gear. He looked down the long pier and saw Nash sitting inside the captured boat, holding his dog. Marcus raised a heavy radio to his mouth and called for an immediate emergency medical team. Nash rested his tired head gently against his loyal dog. He closed his eyes and finally let out a long, shuddering breath. The heavy, crushing burden of his past combat failures finally lifted from his weary shoulders. He saved the mission, but more importantly, his best friend saved him. As we look back at the incredible journey of Nash and Zeus, we learn a powerful lesson about loyalty, trust, and the unbreakable bond between a human and their animal companion. From my perspective, this story is a beautiful reminder that the deepest wounds of our past can often be healed by the unconditional love of a faithful friend. Even in our darkest and most dangerous moments, we are never truly alone when we have someone who will stand by our side against all odds. True heroes do not always wear uniforms. Sometimes they have fur, 4 legs, and a heart full of courage. If this story touched your heart today, please share it with your friends and family. Leave a comment below to let us know your thoughts, and do not forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring and incredible tales. May God bless you and your loved ones with abundant peace, joy, and protection. Please type Amen in the comments if you believe in the miraculous power of loyalty and love.